Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third and final of the Ihaka lectures for 2018. This lecture is from someone with a slightly different background. Alberto Cairo is Professor of Visual Journalism at the University of Miami, but before that he was an actual journalist and infographics expert. If you don't recognize his name, as I initially didn't, it's probably because you're monolingual like me. He previously was an infographics and graphics editor and at both the largest news site in Spain and also at Editora Globo, who are the large group of magazines in Brazil. I mentioned this to one of the Brazilian students, and he said, "Oh, they're the ones that own everything." Alberto is also known for his books on infographics and for his speaking on the subject, his courses on how to use and understand data and understand the news with graphics. And we're very pleased to have him here as a speaker for the Ihaka lectures.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you so much. All right. So, well, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you again for inviting me. I'm hugely honored to be able to speak to you here today. I confess, though, that when I was invited to deliver the Ihaka lectures, I got a little bit nervous, just because I have been using the R programming language for quite a while, so I'm a huge admirer of the work that has been done here in the department. At the same time, I knew that I was going to present to an audience made of mainly of statisticians and scientists and data scientists, etc. And I always get a little bit nervous about presenting to this kind of audiences because I am a journalist, right? So I am going to begin by showing you something that I tweeted right before I did a similar lecture years ago at the US Census Bureau to a huge audience of more than 200 statisticians. That was very imposing and frightening for me. I tweeted right before that, and I could have tweeted this again today before the lecture. Hello, I will be speaking at the US Census Bureau on Thursday. I'm thinking about opening with this line. Hello, I'm Alberto Cairo. I'm a journalist and a designer. That means that I am one of those people who misinterprets and mishandles the statistics that you produce. Well, this is a little bit unfair, though, because I work with the statistics and I try not to misinterpret them. Then a friend of mine, who happens to be also a journalist in Spain, replied to this tweet saying, well, perhaps what you want to say, I am one of those hipsters who has made your boring profession so much more fashionable and sexy. This is also quite unfair, I believe, although part of my life, I would say my entire professional life, has been devoted to designing graphics to inform the public and making numbers more understandable, but also more presentable, more attractive for the general public. These are several screenshots of both infographics or pictorial explanations that I produced in the past, and also graphics that are based more on data visualizations that I produced during my tenure in Brazil. I'm originally from Spain, but as Thomas said, I also lived in Brazil for quite a while before moving to Miami and enjoy the weather over there. So anyway, today I would like to talk a little bit about how charts lie and what I think that we can do about it. I am not going to refer those to charts that lie for obvious reasons, such as this one, right? These lies for obvious reasons. I don't need to explain those to you, right? Truncating the y-axis of a bar graph is usually a very bad idea. And we all know that. Everybody knows this already. I think that this is already common knowledge, or it should be. I will also not talk about graphics that are obviously wrong, all right, such as this one, all right, graphics that are obviously bad, charts that are completely incomprehensible, charts that lie because they are terribly designed and horribly cluttered, such as that one, or charts that are obvious aggressions to our sense of aesthetics, and good design. Other people have done this already. Other people have talked about why graphics like these are wrong and why they are bad, what we can do to improve them. There is even websites that collect examples of horrible graphics in case that you're interested. For example, there's a wonderful website called WTF Visualisations that you can find online, and that collects examples of graphics that are completely terrible, right? But these, all the graphics that you may find in websites like these are a little bit too obvious, right? They're so grotesque and so badly designed that it's very, very obvious and very easy to call them out. Today, I'm more interested in talking about graphics that are not necessarily horribly designed, but that can still be misinterpreted, and what we can do, perhaps, to help our friends, family, and people we live with to educate themselves in becoming better readers of charts. I'm going to be using, by the way, the word chart to refer to any sort of graphical representation of information. So by chart, I mean statistical graphs, maps, diagrams that depict data. I'm going to use the word chart for everything. I would like this talk also to help dispel several myths and cliches that I have come to loathe a little bit throughout my life. For example, I would like people to stop saying a picture is worth 1,000 words, because this is not true. It may be true in some cases, but more often than not, it is not. Another one that I have heard quite a lot being a journalist in newsrooms, another saying or cliche that I have heard quite a lot is, oh, this chart speaks for itself, right? So people see the chart, it speaks for itself. I don't need to see anything else, right? I already understand the issue. And this happens, by the way, because people tend to equate statistical charts and maps with illustrations. They believe that they are intuitive and easy to read. They just take a quick look at it and say, oh, I understand it. It speaks for itself. And as a consequence of that, many journalists have come to start writing headlines, a particular kind of headline that I really, really dislike, which is the following. This chart, or series of charts, shows everything you need to know about Well, charts never show everything you want to know about something. That's the first thing, right? And charts are not illustrations. Charts, data visualizations, are visual arguments. And in order to understand an argument, you need to read it carefully. And usually, a single piece of an argument is not enough to understand that argument. I believe that abandoning myths such as this one and understanding how charts lie sometimes to ourselves, it's really, really helpful and very important nowadays because charts are everywhere for different reasons. One of the reasons why charts are everywhere right now is the existence of tons of programming languages such as R, free tools such as Insight, developed here in the Department of Statistics, which is a tool that I use all the time, and I teach my students to use. Tools for interactive data visualization, such as Flourish, which is a wonderful free tool to produce JavaScript-driven data visualizations, Quantum GIS to produce data maps, and so on and so forth. If you're interested in learning about any of those tools, you can go to my website. I have tons of tutorials in which I explain how to use them. So the existence of programs and software tools such as these have opened the door for many people to start adopting data visualization as a language. And I believe that this is absolutely wonderful. It has caused an explosion of data visualization usage in many different realms and in many different knowledge domains, right? Not only statistics, but also journalism, right? And another reason why data visualization charts is becoming more popular is news media. News media is using charts more and more and more and more and more. Here you have just a sample of several media publications that I happen to follow on a regular basis, mostly in the United States, but not only, also from places like Ukraine and Germany, etc. Not that I can read Ukrainian, by the way. I always use Google Translate to read their graphics. But all these organizations produce excellent data visualization. And as an effect of that, they have basically made their public used to seeing data visualizations or charts on a regular basis. Now, these media organizations are adopting charts more and more because based on their analytics, they have seen that charts are very popular with the public. Whenever you publish a chart in a news story, that news story becomes more popular. Actually, one of the snippets of content, one of the factoids that I like to mention in my talks is that the most popular piece of content ever published by the NewYorkTimes.com, the New York Times, the most important newspaper in the United States, is a chart. It's a data visualization. I'm going to show it to you in just 1 second. That data visualization is titled, How Y'all Use and You Guys Talk, or more commonly known, the dialect map. What is a dialect map? The dialect map is basically a quiz in which you answer several questions, and based on the answers that you give to those questions, the map will pinpoint where you live. depending on how you say certain words, how you pronounce certain words or certain terms, you will get a map, you will get your own map that will show you where people speak more like you than more like unlike you, right? So the way that it works is that you got the question, you say, well, how do you address a group of 2 more people? I lived in North Carolina in the south of the United States, so I usually say y'all, hey y'all, I click on that, I click on next, and it tells me, well, if you say y'all, probably you live in the south of the United States. Then the next question is, what would you call a sale of unwanted items in your porch? Say tax sale, yard sale, garage sale, rummage sale, thrift sale, stoop sale, carpet sale. I say garage sale, all right? I live in Florida, that's very common. They tell me, well, I'm not really sure where you live right now. And I say, how do you pronounce bean? With the vowel sit, I C. And it tells me, now I really don't know where you live. Now, the tool doesn't really work well with me because I am not a native English speaker, as you may hear already, right? Because of my strong Spanish accent. But I have heard that if you're a native English speaker from the United States, this tool is incredibly precise. Now, just for you to know, this tool, or interactive graphic, or visualization, was produced through a collaboration between a linguist who created all the data, gathered all the data through a survey, and a series of interactive designers and journalists who created the application. One of them is, by the way, and I say this with a huge honor, is a former student of mine, Wilson Andrews. Anyway, so the tool, the graphic actually became so popular, the most popular piece of content ever published by the NewYorkTimes.com, that it also became a book that I actually recommend to anybody here who's interested in charting, that is titled Speaking American. It's a lot of fun, speaking American, in which you can see, for example, how people pronounce the word data. Do you say data or do you say data? Well, people in different places of the United States say more data or more data, as you can see. Or you say you guys, y'all, etc. And then do you say water fountain or do you say drinking fountain? Okay, there are different preferences in terms of that. By the way, let me make an aside. If you're a student of statistics or data science here at the university, I think that there is an opportunity of doing something like this here in New Zealand, and let me tell you why. Yesterday, I went for a walk close by to my hotel, and I visited a couple of bookstores. I like to visit local bookstores wherever I go, and I got several books about New Zealand and about other things. One of the books that I got, and I have it over here, is titled The Official New Zealand Dictionary of Colloquialisms, which is a pure and delight. And also, it taught me a lot about Kiwi's dialect. For example, I learned about terms such as jack shit, sparrow's fart, shit a brick. I love that, shit a brick. Danger wonk. And then my favorite one, Bob's your uncle. So I love that one for some reason. It's so random, so strange. Anyway, so I believe that there is an opportunity for you to do something similar, right? Some sort of dialect map here from New Zealand. Anyway, so going back to data visualization and more serious stuff. So data visualization is basically consists of transforming numbers into visual forms in order to be able to extract patterns and trends from the data. That's all what data visualization is, right? So you may begin with a huge spreadsheet, such as this one. This is a huge data set of global temperatures in Celsius degrees from the year 1000 up to the year 2000. And if I ask you to figure out what's going on in this data set, as a normal human being, you will not be able to do that, right? I have a hard time visualizing numbers in my brain. Right? If you want to focus just on a specific figure, the table works really well. You can just read that figure over there. But if what you want to extract is the overall change throughout the years, the patterns and trends in the data, all right, have temperatures going up, going down, that's really difficult to visualize through a table, right? But it's much easier when you transform all those numbers into some sort of data visualization, into some sort of chart. This is, by the way, one of the most famous and in my opinion, one of the best charts created during the 20th century. It's commonly called the hockey stick chart, which basically shows you a pattern that we are all familiar with nowadays, which is that in the past, global temperatures varied, but within a certain range. And then once we get to the 20th century, suddenly global temperatures started spiking up very, very rapidly. And it shows tons of things. It shows you the actual point estimates. It shows you the smooth over there, and it shows you the level of uncertainty over there. I believe that is 2 standard deviations or something like that. I don't remember the details. But in any case, the patterns that the chart shows were hidden, all right, by the data set that we had before. By transforming the numbers into a chart, suddenly we start seeing things from the data that may have gone unnoticed if we didn't represent the data visually. Data visualization is based on the very simple and very basic, but also very powerful idea of visual encoding. All data visualization is mapping numbers onto properties of objects, right? You begin with a series of numbers, and then you vary some sort of property of an object. It could be the length, the height of an object. It could be the position of an object, like in a dot plot. It could be the size of an object, like in a bubble chart. It could be the color of an object, the color hue or the color shade. All those are properties of objects that you can vary when you visualize data. So this is all wonderful. I believe that it is great that data visualization is becoming so popular and is everywhere. But throughout the years, I have started growing a little bit concerned about how people read graphics and whether people, common people, not people like you, but the common people that don't have a basic training in numeracy, etc., read or misread graphics. I have started asking myself, first of all, do designers who create charts in the media, for example, understand what they are doing? That's the first question. And do the people who consume the charts that are put in news media or that they see in social media every day, are they able to understand those charts that they are seeing? Do they understand the grammar of graphics, right? Do they understand the vocabulary, the symbolization that is used to represent the data? Now, one of the reasons why I have started being concerned about this is that several pieces of evidence that I have gathered throughout the years have led me to believe that not everybody understands charts really, really well. For example, I have seen studies in which the researchers tested simple bar graphs, and the readers who saw those bar graphs didn't interpret them well. In 2014, the Pew Research Center did a survey among 1,000 Americans. They sampled the United States. They got a sample of 1,000 people, and they tested those 1,000 people into their scientific knowledge. They asked them several questions. And one of the questions that they ask is, what do you see in this chart, right? This is your more bread and butter scatter plot, that we see every single day. The horizontal axis, position on the horizontal axis is the amount of sugar that a person on each one of those countries consumes on average, and then the position on the vertical axis is the amount of decayed teeth. So the message is obvious, right? In general, and on average, the more sugar is consumed in a country, the more the number of decayed teeth. Well, the result was that 63% of people in the sample could interpret this graphic correctly. The other third of this sample of people couldn't interpret this graphic correctly. Now, I usually say that this is both good news and bad news. It is good news in the first place because I believe that if the same survey had been conducted when I began my career in journalism 20 years ago, probably that percentage will be much lower. The fact that news media is using graphic forms such as the scatter plot is helping educate the public into understanding these kinds of graphics a little bit better. So that's the good news. Now, the bad news is that 1/3 of the population, at least in the United States, still cannot read a scatter plot correctly. This is worrying for several reasons. One of them is that the scatter plot is not a novel graphic form, right? The scatter plot has been around for more than 150 years. The first scatter plots were designed by people such as Sir Francis Galton in the 19th century in his studies about correlation and regression. For example, he did a study about the relationship that exists between the height of people and the size of the head of people, right? In general, he discovered that the taller a person is, the bigger the head of that person is, right? But there are always outliers. I am an outlier. I'm relatively short and I have a very big head, right? So I'm not one of the outliers over there. Anyway, so not everybody understands even simple graphics correctly. And this is worrying per se, but there is more. Even if we don't interpret graphics well, or we don't pay a lot of attention to the charts that we see in news media because we believe that, oh, I understand everything, I take a quick look at that, I understand that graphic. Even if we don't pay a lot of attention to the graphics that we see in news media, the mere presence of those graphics is persuasive, right? So several research projects have shown that whenever you start including charts and numbers in any sort of message, for some reason those messages start getting a little bit more persuasive. And I believe that that is dangerous, that people don't read charts carefully, but still they may be persuaded by the messages that contain those charts. So throughout the years, I have become convinced that it is time to follow the guide of people such as cartographer Mark Monmonier, who a while ago, in a wonderful book titled Mapping It Out, he says that Today, nowadays, in order to become or consider yourself an educated person, you need to have more than mere literacy. Literacy is the basics. You need to have that, obviously, or articulacy, the ability to speak correctly. You also need numeracy, the ability not only to deal with the statistics, but to think critically about the numbers that you see in news media every day. And as a consequence of that, or as a follow-up to numeracy, also graphicacy. Right, a very fanciful word that basically means visual literacy, the ability to read numbers represented graphically through charts and maps, etc. I believe that numeracy is something that you can learn on your own, right? Even if you are not formally educated in numeracy, and I was not formally educated in numeracy, there are plenty of books out there that you can consult in order to become a little bit more educated. This is just a sample of the many books right now in the market that can help you become a little bit more numerate. So numeracy, I believe, is very well covered in the literature, but graphicacy is not. And this is something that really worries me. And that's the whole reason why I put this lecture together. And also, and I'm going to make a little bit of a surprise announcement right now, I am at the moment also writing a book about graphicacy. The title of the book is not going to be graphicacy, just because that sounds very technical, right? It's a little bit more predictable, but also a little bit more attractive. It's going to be titled How Charts Lie, and it will probably be published in 2019. This is going to be a non-technical book for the general public, similar to naked statistics, similar to how to lie with the statistics and things like that. So what you're witnessing today here is basically a trailer to the book, because I'm going to show you the structure of the book, right? So I usually say, I say both in the book and also in the lecture, that charts may lie for several different reasons. I'm going to list them over here. I believe there are 6 different reasons that chart may lie, right? So I'm going to list them over here. I will begin with the last one, right? The last one over there. Charts lie very often because we love to lie to ourselves, all right? We like to see what we want to see in the charts that are presented to us, and this is highly dangerous, right? We have all heard about effects such as the confirmation bias, right? We see a chart that confirms what we already believe or what we want to believe, and we say, well, this chart shows everything, right? It confirms what I already believe. So let's begin with that one, because it's probably the most dangerous, and it's related to all the others that I will speak in just 1 minute. This is a map that hangs on the walls of the White House at the moment, right? So this is a photograph that was taken by a reporter who was visiting the White House. And as you can see, it's a map that represents the results of the 2016 presidential election. Red are areas that were won by President Trump. Blue are areas that were won by candidate Clinton. So it's red for Republican, blue for Democrat. President Trump is very fond of this map. There's actually a report by several reporters from Reuters who said that they went visit President Trump in the Oval Office after 100 days of the presidency, and President Trump was handing out copies of the map. This is a photograph that was taken inside the Oval Office during one of those interviews. You can see that President Trump is very excited, and he has all the maps on that table. He's obviously very proud of his victory, and he should be. I mean, he won against all odds, right, and again, all forecasts, right, that were giving him a probability of between 10, 15, 30%. By the way, this is just an aside. One of the challenges that we face is that people believe that 30% probability equals 0 probability. That's a very dangerous thing, but it's completely unrelated to graphicacy. Anyway, President Trump also tweeted about this map a while ago. So just a few days ago, he tweeted, "I want to encourage all my many Texas friends to vote in the primary for Governor Greg Abbott," and so on and so forth. One opponent of President Trump tweeted back at him saying, "You have no friends." And then a supporter of President Trump replied to this person saying, "Really? Do you believe that we don't have friends? Take a look at that map." And then President Trump retweeted this person saying, "Such a beautiful map, thank you." Well, the map is certainly beautiful, but the map is also highly misleading for several reasons. I'm going to try to explain why. By the way, media that supports President Trump also loves to use this map. I have seen this map reproduced in tons of media organizations that are highly conservative. I have also seen that map published or shown on book covers. So this is a book, an ebook that was published by an author called Jack Posobiec a while ago. This titled Citizens for Trump, and you can see that map again, right? So having worked in this industry for more than 20 years and having a little bit about how charts work, etc., and having a person who likes to offer, who likes to work for the public good, I like to offer my free advice to whoever wants to take it. So when I saw that map on social media, I replied to Posobiec saying that he either needed to change the title of the book or change the map on the cover of the book, because the map is not showing what the title says. The title is saying citizens for Trump, but the map is not showing citizens. So being aware that creating a new map may be a little bit difficult because you need to use a specialized software such as R, right, which is super, super fancy, right, or quantum GIS, which sounds even fancier, right, perhaps it will be easier to change the title of the book to something that better matches what the map is showing. So I suggested that title that's a little bit closer to what the map is showing, Counties for Trump, because the map is not showing citizens. It's showing amount of territory. Remember the whole idea behind data visualization. Data visualization is the proportional representation of numbers through the variation of graphic forms, right? Let's take a look at the amount of red and the amount of blue on that map. Is it proportional to the popular vote in the United States? It is not. I will do the math for you. There's an 80% of red and a 20% of blue. That is the area covered by each one of these colors on that map of the continental United States. But we all know that this is not what happened in the electoral, in the elections in 2016. If you take a look at the popular vote, President Trump won 46%, candidate Clinton got 48%. So if the numbers were 46 and 48, you cannot use a map to celebrate your victory that shows an 80% versus 20% split. Now, why is President Trump using this map? Because charts lie, because we love to lie to ourselves. The map is showing a landslide victory, and that panders to President Trump's feelings. By the way, this happens to everybody, not only to President Trump. Now, the challenge with the map is that many of those red areas that you're seeing over there are actually empty. Barely anybody lives there, right? This is a map that was created by a friend of mine, Kenneth Field, who is a cartographer, who works for ESRI, and who mapped 160-something million points, all right? Each one corresponding to a voter living in one area, and you can see that those areas completely devoid of people. But we could represent citizens. If we are going to write a book titled Citizens for Trump, we can represent citizens a little bit more accurately and a little bit simpler, perhaps, through a bar graph. A simple bar graph will represent the citizens, right? So we have there red for President Trump, blue for candidate Clinton, 46%, 48%, plus 6% of the vote that went to other minoritarian candidates. Now, the picture, though, if you want to write a title of a book, a title, Presidents for Trump or President for Clinton, it doesn't really matter, is that this graphic is also quite incomplete because it is not taking into account how many people didn't vote in the US presidential election. That number is almost 40% of the population of voting age didn't even vote, didn't even bother voting. And if you when you take that into account and you create another graph, you will see that citizens for Trump and citizens for Clinton is actually a much smaller number than it looks over there. It's not 80% anymore. Now we have only 25% of the population who supported either of the majoritarian candidates in the election. Now, the United States, and I believe that this is true of most countries in the world, is becoming so ideologically divided that it's also becoming divided in terms of preferences when it comes to charts. So I follow both conservatives and liberals, or progressives in social media, and I have observed this phenomenon. Whenever a conservative tweets something or publishes something on Facebook about the elections, they love to use that map over there just because it confirms their expectations or their desires, right? A victory by a landslide. Whenever a progressive sees that map published in social media, they usually replied with this other map saying, how do you dare use that crappy map over there? You should use this other map instead that better represents the popular vote, right? Now, this map over here, right, is also faulty for several reasons. This map here is representing the amount of votes received by the winning candidate on each county of the United States. That gives you a clue to what I believe that this map is faulty, because it is hiding a very important fact, which is that there is plenty of conservative voters in Democratic areas and plenty of Democratic voters in Republican areas, and they are not displayed on the map. Perhaps a better map will be actually a couple of maps, two maps, one for Republican vote and another one for Democratic vote, in which you can see those bubbles represented accurately, right, sized accurately according to those numbers. But let me tell you, I think that everybody's wrong in this discussion, because if you really want to celebrate your victory as a presidential candidate, let's just make this assumption. Let's suppose, for instance, that I can run for president of the United States, right? Which is an impossibility because I was not born in the United States. But just for the sake of, I can run for Congress, though, right? Giving you a clue to my future. Anyway, so let's suppose that I can run for president and I win the presidency for some reason, and I want to celebrate my victory with a chart or with a series of charts. I would never use any of these charts because all of these charts are beside the point. They don't really show the metric that really matters, the thing that you really need to control, to seize, if you want to win a presidential election. If you want to win a presidential election in the United States, you don't need to win a victory in the popular vote. And it's also besides the point how many counties or the amount of territory that you control. What really matters to win a presidential election is the number of electoral votes that you win, right? In the United States is an indirect system of voting, right? So you vote in your state, and then whoever takes a majority of the vote in each state gets all the electoral votes, with a few exceptions, such as Maine, that distributes the electoral votes a little bit differently. So this is the map or the chart that I will publish, or that I will print out and frame and put on the walls of my White House, because it better represents that metric, the metric that really matters. Now, just as an aside, let me show you another example of map that was misused during the elections. So, after the 2016 elections, I discovered that this guy was planning to run for the Senate. His name is Kid Rock. He's a singer, a very popular singer in the United States. He's a country rap singer. He's a very strange mixture of genre. He's conservative, if you want to get a little bit more information. And he announced that he was going to run as a Republican in 2018 for the US Senate from Michigan, as a senator from Michigan. Later on, he said that it was all a joke, but I don't think that it was a joke. There's actually a website called kidrockforsenate.com, so you can see that. In any case, I saw this guy on social media, and I saw that he was also tweeting about the merchandising that he sells in his online store. And as a lover of charts and of graphs, of maps, one of the t-shirts that he sells in his website really got my attention. I take a look at that t-shirt. This is a t-shirt that you can buy in Kid Rock's store. As you can see, is the results of the 2016 presidential election: red for the Republican, blue for Democratic. It is only that the legend is slightly different, because Kid Rock says through this t-shirt that the results of the 2016 presidential election, when represented on a map like that, actually represent the boundaries between two different countries. The red country is called the United States of America, and the blue country is called Pakistan. Now, having worked again for 20 years in data visualization and infographics, I love to offer my free advice. The advice that I will give Kid Rock is that perhaps the state-level representation of the 2016 presidential elections is not the best representation of the boundaries between the United States of America and Pakistan, for the following reason. I have lived in two places in the United States, right? In North Carolina and in Florida. When I moved to North Carolina, I knew very little about North Carolina, other than that it was usually red in the electoral maps that I had seen up to that point in Spain. So I moved to North Carolina with the expectation of finding a slightly Republican conservative state. Fine with me, I'm pretty moderate in my political opinions. I get to North Carolina, I went to live to a town called Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Chapel Hill, North Carolina is like living in Berkeley University in the 60s. It was super progressive. And now I live in Miami, or in Kendall, in Florida. It's a city next to Miami. And both places, both Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and Kendall in Florida, they are not the United States of America. They are Pakistan. So that's a very much better representation of the boundaries between those two countries. So charts first lie because we love to lie to ourselves and see what we want to see in the charts that are shown to us. But let's take a look at the other reasons also. A chart may lie also because it uses faulty data. That's the most obvious reason that a chart may lie, right? We all have heard the saying, garbage in, garbage out, right? It's a very common saying in statistics. And let me show you an example of that. A while ago, and why it is so important to, whenever we see a chart in social media, never to retweet it immediately, but take a quick look at the source and see the original data if you have the time. Let me show you an example in which I did that. A while ago, I saw the following story in Vox.com, which is one of those organizations that I happen to like to follow and that I admire. I believe that they do a good job, but sometimes they publish stories that are a little bit dubious. And they make mistakes like everybody else, right? I have made, by the way, every single mistake that I'm going to point out in the talk today is a mistake that I have made myself. Therefore, I feel entitled to point that out. All right, so Vox.com published a story with one of those titles that I really dislike, right? America's healthcare prices are out of control. These 11 charts prove it. Well, first of all, charts never prove anything. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that the charts looked a little bit dubious to me. I'm going to explain you why. And this is not the reason why the story, I believe, is faulty. But this is the reason why some sort of bullshit detector started ringing in the back of my head. I saw this graphic over here, and as you can see, it compares the price of a cataract surgery in 4 different countries. You have the United States, you have Switzerland, you have Spain, my country of origin, and then you have the UK. And as you can see, the price of average price of a cataract surgery in the United States is double of what it is in Spain. Now, the reason why this bullshit detector started ringing is that my entire family works in healthcare. I'm the only black sheep who decided to study journalism. And I know how much money my dad, my mom, my uncle made throughout the years. And I know that if they had moved to the United States, their salaries will probably double or even triple in some cases. So the first question that I asked myself, and I couldn't answer that question, by the way, is, are these prices controlled by purchasing power parity? Because $1,000 in one country is a lot of money. $1,000 in another country may be a little bit less money because of cost of living. So is cost of living considered in this kind of thing? So I didn't know, but I got curious about it. By the way, another thing that got my attention is that this balance, all right, this between double here, half there, it also is equivalent to the difference between the average household disposable income in those countries. The disposable income in Spain of the average family is half of what it is in the United States. So anyway, I got curious about this, and I went to the original source. The source is linked from the article, so I could follow it. That's good practice. But this is just an aside. Whenever you see a news organization that doesn't link directly to the primary source of the data, distrust that news organization by default, period. Right? Good organizations always link to the primary sources of their data. So I went to the source. The source is an organization called the International Federation of Health Plans, which sounds really impressive. And this is the page that describes how these average prices were calculated for all these countries. And I believe that it sounds a little bit dubious. Let me explain you why. And again, I'm not talking as a statistician. Probably a professional statistician would see many other problems. I'm talking just as a citizen seeing that. So the first thing that I saw is that the sample was not randomly selected. The sample is self-selected. They say these prices were calculated, submitted by participating federation member plans. So it's a little bit of the first red flag, right? But I continue reading this page. The second thing that they say is that the average prices for cataract surgery, a night in a hospital, different kinds of procedures, etc., all these prices for the United States were calculated by averaging the prices submitted by tons of different healthcare plans, right? So you have like a huge data set of healthcare plans, right? Some of them more expensive, some of them cheaper, right? You average the price, you calculate the average, and then you report the average, right? Some of them are expensive, some of them look more cheaper. And as you can see, prices for the United States were calculated by averaging hundreds of millions of reports. That sounds fine to me, right? They have a huge data set, they calculate the average, that may be representative of the average price paid in the United States for a cataract surgery. Now, what about other countries? Here comes the worrying part. Prices for other countries were calculated based on the price provided by one private healthcare plan. This is highly worrying. Remember the infographic that I showed you before, right? In any market, some providers are very expensive, some providers are very cheap. If you have 100 million reports, right, if you calculate the average, well, that sounds fine to me. But if you choose just one of them, and you don't tell me how you chose it, it may happen that that particular healthcare plan is either much more expensive or much cheaper than the average. You cannot assume that that healthcare provider coincides or matches the average of that particular country. That's highly problematic, right? Moreover, and this, the last line of this page adds insult to injury. At the very end of the page, the source itself tells you indirectly, please don't use these data. Because at the end, they say, Comparisons across different countries are complicated. Of course, they are complicated by differences in different markets also, but also because single plans' prices may not be representative of prices paid by other plans in that market. Of course, then why do you publish this data? That's the first thing. Or as a journalist, why do you use this data without verifying the data first? I know why. Because we journalists are usually very rushed. And we see something that confirms what we already believe. Because I already believe that prices in the United States for healthcare are really crazy, right? So I am the kind of audience for that story. I believe that story beforehand, and I'm more likely than not to retweet it. Now I know a little bit better, and I have learned to double check the sources a little bit, just a tiny bit, reading these kinds of descriptions. Now, numbers can also be problematic if they are represented the wrong way, right? This is also a case of using the wrong data. This was published a while ago by the Financial Times, which is not the Financial Times in the UK, which is an organization that I happen also to like quite a lot. They have an excellent graphics department. It's one of my favorites organizations. But they published this map over here that shows you crime in London. When you take a look at the map, it looks fine, right? The darker the color, the higher the number of crimes in each region of London. But when you take a look at the legend, you will see that the legend is highly problematic because it is showing non-normalized data. It's showing counts, right? And that's highly problematic in a choropleth map. Why? I'm going to try to explain you why through a cartoon. A while ago, XKCD, which is an excellent cartoon about science and statistics, in the United States, published the following cartoon. The guy over there says the business implications are clear, and we have a map over there that shows our site's users, right? So you map all your site's users on that choropleth map. The redder the color, the higher the number of users in that particular region. Not normalized data, it's just number of visitors. And then you map also, with the same kind of color map, you also map the subscribers to Martha Stewart Living magazine. And as you can see, there is almost a perfect relationship between that, right? The more people use our website, whatever that website is, the more subscribers to Martha Stewart Living, right? And then at the end, they also map the consumers of furry pornography. And as you can see, it matches, right? So the business implications are clear, whatever those implications are, right? So non-normalized data in maps like using color can be highly problematic. There are other kinds of representation that are very suited for non-normalized data, for actual counts rather than rates or percentages. A graphic or a chart may lie also because it doesn't show an appropriate amount of data. And I like to stress this whenever I talk to an audience of journalists because, and I know that most of you are not journalists, but when I talk to journalists, I like to emphasize this point a lot because we journalists love to simplify. The verb to simplify is used all the time in newsrooms. Let's simplify this story. It's too complicated. Let's simplify it, right? And I believe that there is something nice about that. We want to present information clearly to people, right? But I prefer to not use the verb to simplify. I prefer to use the verb to clarify, right? Which are slightly different. Clarification doesn't always involve reducing the amount of information that you show to people. Sometimes in order to clarify a story, you need to show more data, not less data. If you show less data when you should be showing more data to clarify a story, that story will be wrong. You will be oversimplifying the story. Let me show you a couple of examples. Probably you have heard about the recent debate in the United States about the tax cuts, right? The Republicans have passed a tax cut. And Speaker Paul Ryan tweeted this just a while ago. $1,000 and something with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that's how much the average American family of four will save each year on their taxes. The bottom line, tax reform will make a difference for so many families. And he tweeted the amount of money, very big number, right? Politicians and also journalists, we love big numbers, or huge numbers, right? But the problem with huge numbers is that they usually obscure more than they illuminate, right? They reduce, they basically condense a lot of complexity into a single figure. And as we all know, a simple average may not capture the entire reality of the data, particularly if the underlying distribution is highly skewed. And this is the kind of graphic that I would like people to discuss, because this is the actual income distribution of families in the United States. So certainly a person on the median, right, that whatever that is over here, the median family will save that amount of money. But as an informed citizen, I'm not a citizen of the United States, but for tax purposes I'm called a citizen, right? I, as an informed citizen, I would like to know how much this person will save, or that family will save, how much that person will save, and also how much the people who you cannot even chart because they are over there, right? How much a person over there will save in taxes in order to find out whether the tax cut is balanced, well balanced, or it is not well balanced, all right? Charts, usually when they depict only averages, can be highly dangerous and highly misleading. Another example is this one that I like to discuss over here. Now, this shows the US murder rate at the national level in the United States back from the 70s, the 60s, up to 2015. So this shows a pattern that everybody in the United States is very familiar with, right? The murder rate went up very sharply during the 70s and the 80s. Then it came down during the 90s very sharply for different reasons. And then it remained more or less stable in the 2000s. And then in the past 2 or 3 years, the murder rate has started increasing again for different reasons, right? If we could prolong this line chart over here to 2016 and to 2017, the line continues growing. And that's a very worrying fact. We should worry about that. But how much should we worry? That depends on where you live. And here comes the key of this chart. What you're seeing over here, again, is an average, right? It's like the entirety of the United States. We represent murder rates of the entirety of the United States through a simple line. But is this line capturing the reality of the data? I don't think that it is capturing the reality of the data. Why? Because it is not discussing the role of outliers. That line over there is showing you that the murder rate is going up very sharply, but that is largely an effect of certain neighborhoods in certain cities in the United States. There are certain areas in the United States that have become lately so dangerous, so violent, so many people are killed in those very localized small neighborhoods in the United States that they work as a magnet, right? If we go back to the chart, right, that line goes up because we have these neighborhoods up here attracting that line up. But we obscure the fact that most places in the United States, if we could plot them on the chart, will be around down there, right? My neighborhood in Miami, for example, where I live, I have been living in Miami for more than 6 years now. In my neighborhood, we had 1 murder in the last 6 years, which is a very long time. Most places in the United States are very safe, but there are certain neighborhoods that are so far up in terms of number of murders that they skew the entire distribution. The point that I would like to make here, though, is not that the chart itself is wrong. It is that the chart oversimplifies matters. You cannot understand and you cannot have an informed discussion about the murder rate in the United States if you show only the national rate alone. You will be misled by that. You need to show more. You need to show that line chart, the original line chart, and then you need to discuss the role of these outliers that may be skewing that variation. And we must demand from journalists who report about these stories that they do that we do that, show those exceptions. Now, a chart may lie also because it doesn't represent the data accurately. I showed you at the very beginning that awful chart from Venezuela in which the y-axis was completely truncated. Let me show you another one that was used in a public discussion. It was used in Congress. A while ago in the Congress in the United States, there was a discussion about whether the United States should keep funding an organization called Planned Parenthood, which provides healthcare services to women, in particular cancer screening and also birth control, etc., to women in the United States. They also provide abortions. Now, conservative representatives attack Planned Parenthood during this discussion using this chart over here, which, as you can see, shows a very, very striking pattern. The number of cancer screening procedures goes down very sharply, and then at the same rate, the number of abortions goes up very rapidly as well to create that pattern of an X, right? Until you start reading those very tiny numbers that you have over there, and you realize that the number of cancer screening prevention services has gone down from 2 million down to 1 million. So that has been a drop of a half, right? So it's like half of the procedures in the present, right? And then you have the number of abortions, but then the number of abortions has not gone up at the same rate. It was 290,000 abortions back in 2006, and now it's 327,000. So it's certainly not a change at the same rate. Now, some people call out this chart, saying that this chart is complete bullshit, and say, well, you need to put everything on the same scale. Now, when you put everything on the same scale, the picture becomes much clearer. This is what happens, by the way, when you use a kind of charts that people working in finance love,
which is dual scale charts. You can make a dual scale chart say whatever you want, because you basically play around with the scales, and then you can basically end up showing a spurious relationship between the lines that you're representing. We need to be careful with those kinds of charts. In any case, other people also pointed out that this chart also doesn't show an entire picture of the data. It is also obscuring very important information, such as the fact that Planned Parenthood does many other things other than cancer screening procedures and abortions. So a graphic designer, Emily Schutz, took the work through of downloading a data set of every single procedure that Planned Parenthood conducts every year in the United States, as she plotted everything on a chart, beautiful chart over here, showing that yes, I mean, number of cancer screening procedures may have gone down, but then other many services, such as, for example, STD testing, has increased in the past few years. Contraception has declined just a tiny bit. Perhaps some of the effects that we see over here, by the way, are related to the ACA, to Obamacare. Right? People are getting health insurance, therefore they don't need Planned Parenthood anymore. They can just get health care from other cases. This is just something that I'm making up. I don't know if that is the case. But the fact that I would like to point out is that regardless of what your political or ideological position is, objectively, that chart is much better than this. That's a much better representation of the data than that. So if you want to have a public discussion in Congress, either to fund or to defund Planned Parenthood, you always need to use that chart, not this other chart over here, because this is highly misleading. It doesn't represent the data correctly. Now, a chart can also lie because it either shows patterns that are not there, or it fails to show patterns that should be disclosed or should be shown. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about the common science statistics correlation doesn't equal causation, because that should be common knowledge already. I will just point out that there is a wonderful website that everybody can visit called Spurious Correlations, which is a wonderful, wonderful exemplification of this principle of correlation doesn't equal causation. It shows the correlation, for example, between US spending on science, space, and technology and suicides by hanging, strangulation, and suffocation. And the correlation is extremely, extremely strong. Or my favorite one, number of people who drowned by falling into a pool, and films Nicolas Cage appeared in. It's a very, very clear correlation over there. Now, sometimes charts or stories that include numbers may lie, all right, because we fail to show patterns that we should show or that we should consider to discuss whatever it is that we are discussing. Let me show you a case that is not a chart. It's a data-driven opinion column that was written by an author called Bret Stephens. Now, Bret Stephens is a columnist in the New York Times, a moderate conservative columnist in the New York Times that was hired a few months ago, I believe that a year ago, something like that. The first column that he published in the New York Times was titled Climate of Complete Certainty. And the main point that he was trying to make in the column is that climate scientists are a little bit too certain about climate change. They should consider more the uncertainty of the data, right? Now, this column, and I would encourage you to try to find it online, is highly problematic. Again, talking not as a statistician, because I'm not a statistician, but as a journalist. It's problematic for several reasons, I believe. The first reason why is that it doesn't show or it doesn't consider patterns that it should consider in order to make the argument. Let me explain what I mean. At the beginning of the column, he says, for example, anyone who has read the 2014 report, Intergovernmental Panel, et cetera, will notice that the modest warming on the Earth between the 1880 is indisputable, right? That moderate increase of 0.85 degrees Celsius. But everything that happens after that passes as an accepted fact is really a matter of probabilities. Well, everything is a matter of probabilities in statistics. But in any case, or I make it wrong, but in any case, how modest is that modest increase? Let's take a look at the patterns. Let's take a look at the data, something that I bothered to do because I have many friends who work in the environmental sciences. So I asked them, how moderate is that? And they pointed out these two charts that you have over here that Bret Stephens should have considered for his column. What you see over here, I'm going to summarize it for you because these charts were designed by scientists, therefore they're not very clear. Right? Sorry about that. Anyway, but they're very striking in the patterns that they display. Well, the moderate increase that Bret Stephens mentions is this increase over here. Now, in the past 100 years, global temperatures have increased as much as they increased between the year 10,000 in the past up to the year 4,000, up to the year, 7,000 over here. So it took 3,000 years in the past for the Earth to experience the same increase in temperatures that we have experienced in the past 100 years. So that doesn't look very moderate to me. It looks a very, very sharp increase. So that's the first pattern that I believe that Brett Stevens should have considered for his column. Now, the second one is that in one point of the article, he says, claiming total certainty about the science traduces the spirit of science and creates openings for doubt. Demanding abrupt and expensive changes in public policy raises fair questions about ideological intentions. This all sounds great to me. I am all for disclosing uncertainty. Right? I would believe that we need to consider uncertainty and discuss it in news studies. But how uncertain is the data really? Because when you take a look at every single forecast of global temperatures in the future, every single forecast that I have seen points in the same direction, every single one, right? So certainly all these models have very high degrees of uncertainty built around the point estimates, but they all point in the same direction, in a sharp increase of global temperatures. And not only that, living in Miami, there's something that concerns me even more, which is sea level is rising. So my house is going to be seafront at some point in the future, I don't know, in 2060 or something like that, right? So that's what you need to consider if you want to write a column about whether scientists are too certain or too uncertain. You need to consider these patterns. You need to contemplate them if you want to have that discussion. And finally, a chart may lie because it either conceals the uncertainty of the data or it displays that uncertainty in a very unclear manner. Let me show you the example that I love to show to illustrate this last principle. This is a map that I see every year in Miami, right? So this is the Irma map that was shown on TV, one of the many maps that was shown on TV during the Irma hurricane, right? Hurricane maps usually contain that cone that shows you the probable path of the center of the storm. That is called the cone of uncertainty. All right, going back to the uncertainty. People in Miami, by the way, call it the cone of death, because if you are inside the cone, right, it seems that you are threatened by the hurricane. Now, that's highly misleading, because many people believe that if you are outside of the cone, you are safe. All right, one friend of mine who recently moved to Miami saw this map and said, oh, I don't need to install shutters in the windows. I don't need to, the hurricane is moving to the west, so I shouldn't be concerned, right? So how to read this map? Whenever you see this kind of map, this cone of uncertainty, where we should really visualize is something like that, right? Tons of possible paths of the center of the storm. What the cone of uncertainty is showing you is the range of possible paths of the center of the storm. That's how to read the map correctly. Several research projects, though, have shown that this is not how many people read this map. As my friend did, when some people, not everybody, but when some people see the cone of uncertainty, they see the hurricane itself. They see a growing hurricane. Now, we laugh at these, right, when we learn about it, but there's a good reason why. Some people believe this, is that there is a pictorial resemblance between the shape of a hurricane, which is a rounded object, and the shape of the cone of uncertainty. It's rounded, so it seems like the hurricane over there. All right, anyway, let's go back to the map, because by the way, on top of that, you also need to visualize the hurricane itself on top of those possible paths, because a hurricane is a huge thing, right? So a better representation of the data will be something like that, right? Now, the challenge is that if you saw people something like that, they would say, well, you know nothing, right? In any case, so let me show you how everybody, literally everybody, misreads this map, with the exceptions, perhaps, of the people who create the map, and environmental scientists and climate scientists in general. The first time that I saw this kind of map, I asked myself, is this cone of uncertainty containing every single possible path of the center of the storm, right? I knew a little bit better, and I said, well, perhaps it doesn't contain 100 of all the possible forecasts of the center of the storm. My assumption was closer to that. I was assuming that the cone contains 95 out of 100 possible paths of the storm, but there may be outliers, and in some cases, a storm could move outside of the boundaries of the cone of uncertainty. I thought that I knew how to read the map. I was super happy until I actually read what the map is actually representing, because the cone in the cone of uncertainty doesn't contain 95 out of 100 possible paths of the center of the storm. It only contains 67%. That means that 1 out of 3 times you experience a hurricane like this, the hurricane could go anywhere outside that cone. Not anywhere, but it will go outside the cone of uncertainty. This is highly, highly worrying. We need to come up with better ways of representing these kinds of forecasts, right? Let me make an aside before I finish the talk today, because you may be wondering, why is the National Hurricane Center, or NOAA in the United States, keep using this kind of map when we do know that this map is misread by everybody? Blame journalists. Journalists demand this map because there are other ways in which the National Hurricane Center can show you forecasts. They have a beautiful map with different shades showing you the probability of experience, hurricane winds and stuff. It looks very complex and very beautiful, but journalists don't like it. Why? Because we believe that our viewers are stupid. And this looks very clear-cut, right? It shows you there's the boundaries. If you are inside of the cone, you're in danger. If you are outside of the cone, then you can stop worrying, right? And we love to use this map. So in any case, I would like to finish the presentation today by bringing up again that list of reasons why I believe that a chart may lie. And also I would like to make just a very, very last point for the presentation today, which is when I was invited by Thomas, thanks again for inviting me, I started following the Department of Statistics here of Auckland online on Twitter, and I love what you can read on the Twitter account of the Department of Statistics, because they quote H.G. Wells, this wonderful quote from Wells, who said, "Statistical thinking will one day be as necessary for efficient citizenship as the ability to read and write." I do believe that this is true. This is numeracy, and we need to keep teaching numeracy. But I do believe that numeracy alone is not enough, just because we are surrounded by charts in social media and news media. So I would also suggest to Mr. Wells to include graphics, right? So statistical and graphical thinking will one day be, I believe today, nowadays, will be as necessary for efficient citizenship as the ability to read and write. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Can you remember any interesting story based on the data from space?
Data from space? What do you mean by that? By data from space, like planets?
Numbers or some public known data or infographics?
Difficult to say. Well, I remember one. I remember one beautiful story that tried to represent the actual distances between planets in the solar system, and it represented it through a scrollable display, and you needed to scroll for hours. Right? That was a great representation. Let me tell you, I mean, it was a very smart presentation, because for normal people like me who are not statistically trained, sometimes it is difficult to visualize those kinds of magnitudes. You say 100 million kilometers or whatever. I don't know. That sounds to me as tons of kilometers. I don't know how much that is, right? That representation really made that point, that if you want to send a spaceship to Mars, it will take forever to get there, right? Yeah. Thank you. Is that raining? Is that? Yeah, wow.
Thank you. What's your opinion on tools like Gapminder of Hans Rosling, who died last year?
Yeah. So Gapminder and Hans Rosling, in case that you have never heard of Hans Rosling was a professor of global health in Sweden. His website is gapminder.org, and I would encourage you all to visit that website at some point for several reasons. First of all, because I believe that Professor Rosling was, and I say was because he sadly passed a few months ago, in my opinion, he was one of the most wonderful, amazing engagers, presenters of data that the world has ever seen. He was an inspiring speaker. He was able to make data sing. He used charts in his presentations, he animated charts, and he became part of the charts that he was presenting. So I'm telling you my opinion about him already. I think that his work was absolutely amazing, and the fact that he passed away is a great, great loss to the community of people who visualize data, who play with data. I couldn't speak higher of anyone, I believe.
You said that articles that have graphs are usually clicked more.
Sorry?
You said that online articles and media that contain charts are usually clicked more and are more.
Perhaps not clicked more, but they engage people more if the graphic is well designed. Yes.
Doesn't that create the danger that they are just charts for the chart's sake?
It can be, yes, and charts being overused or charts that are overly complicated, right? Any new technology adopted by anyone will be overused at first. And if you take a look at when I started doing interactive graphics back in 2000, I can show you plenty of examples in which a chart that I designed was completely overdone, was completely over-designed, or it was overly complicated, just because we were experimenting with new technologies. At some point, you reach a point in which you understand when and how to use that new technology. So certainly there is a danger out there, but it doesn't worry me that much, because eventually people will end up using the tool correctly.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So this is a bit irrelevant, but I was kind of interested in this as I don't know that much about statistics since I haven't.
Neither do I, so don't be worried about that.
I was just wondering, basically, I've seen many times how sometimes people represent data in 3 dimensions, but then put it onto a 2-dimensional image, so you can't really get the full extent of it. So, do you know any ways to get around this problem?
All right, we could write an entire book about that. In general, graphics in 3D printed on a 2D media, they are not a good idea in general. It is different, though, if the chart is interactive, right? So, for example, I have seen demonstrations of interactive graphics created in places such as Microsoft, in which you had a touch screen, such as this one, and you could throw data onto a scatter plot with 3 dimensions, X, Y, and Z, or Z, as we say in the United States. And then you could rotate the chart in order to make it flat, right? So you could see the relationship between 2 other variables, and then you could rotate the chart and see the relationship between 2 other variables. That's a good use of 3D. But in general, 3D may be a little bit dangerous in 2D media. Yeah. Yes. Oh, we need a microphone, sorry. Oh, we have a question over there, sorry, yeah.
Hi, may I have your opinion on what's the definition of a successful chart or the purpose
Of what, sorry, of a what?
The definition of a successful chart or the purpose of the chart. Because
successful chart, okay.
Sorry.
No, don't worry. Listen to my accent, all right? So, go ahead.
Because sometimes we show the chart because we want people to see the truth. But sometimes we show the charts is to let people to believe what the author wants them to believe.
Yeah.
So that's 2 different perspectives.
It's 2 different goals, right? So whether you can use a chart for persuasion or you should read the chart for information, right? All right, so I am a journalist, so I believe that charts should be used to inform people, not necessarily to persuade them. I mean, you can persuade them, but you should persuade them through the sheer weight of the information that you are providing, which should be honest and balanced and should be showed at enough depth with enough information. If you can persuade through those means, then persuasion is perfectly fine. Now, persuasion by persuasion's sake, that's dangerous, I believe, and we should not go there. Now, how a chart can be considered successful? We could use several metrics to measure that. One of them is whether, first of all, the chart is attractive, because if a chart is not well designed, nobody's going to take a look at it. So it needs to be well designed, right? That's one thing that we could measure, how much time people spend looking at the chart or interacting with it. That's a measure of success. And then another measure of success is whether people can really interpret it or not, right? For example, the cone of uncertainty. We know that barely anybody interprets it correctly, therefore it's not a very successful chart. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've lived and worked in different countries. From your experience, both in Spain and in the States, do you chart in the same way in different countries? Do different countries, different cultures interpret charts in different ways?
That's all right, so that's a research project, right? So that's something that I really would like to learn more about, whether the principles of data visualization that we have all learned thanks to William Cleveland and John Tukey and Edward Tufte and Tamara Munzner and Ross Ihaka and everybody else, and Hadley Wickham, etc. If all those principles are universal because they are perceptually and cognitively based, or if they are culturally dependent, or the mixture between those two things. I have several hunches. I do believe, and I may be wrong in this hunch, okay? This is just a conjecture, that the elementary principles of data visualization are universal, right? The fact that we represent data visually through the variation of graphic forms, the principle of visual encoding, anybody, anywhere can interpret that. What may vary quite a lot is, for example, things such as the use of color, because color means different things in different countries. And also the style of charts, right? So having worked in Spain, the United States, and Brazil, I can tell you in general that charts in the United States, the expectation is that they're going to be bare, right? Like super, just go to the point, just show the data. Yeah, the New York Times does that, and the Washington Post does that, right? So American media tends to produce charts that go straight to the point, just show the data. In Brazil, it's a little bit different. The style of charts in Brazil is a little bit more colorful, right? Because of the visual tradition of the country. So that is reflected in the design of charts that are published in media. And I believe that that's perfectly fine, as long as it doesn't obscure the information. So there may be something into that, but I don't have definite answers. But I would love people to, research about that, because it's a very interesting area. If you have time, I have time. So,
would you care to talk about data censorship in the United States? For instance, is it true that the Centre for Disease Control is forbidden by law to collect statistics on firearm deaths and to carry out any research or publications on that hot topic?
Yeah. I'm not an expert on that. That's what I have heard. Right? That's what I have read in news media, that they're actually forbidden from doing that. And if that is the case, that's awful, obviously. But I don't know. I have not looked into it. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much again. Oh, sorry. Oh, thank you. I love T-shirts. Right? Probably you saw that I'm wearing a T-shirt in the photograph of the announcement of the lecture. I like to wear T-shirts to classes. This is one of the only cases in which I wear a little bit more formally.
New Zealand agricultural
thank you so much. Thanks.
We have a draw for 3 T-shirts for people who signed up for them.
All right, let's see. Randomly select.
Please, yes.
Okay, good. There you go.
Okay, Ramon Quitales. Yep. So we'll.
If you have to get to sing after.
Yeah. I'll do that.
Let me get another one.
Okay, Werner Schmidt. There he is. Yep.
And the third one.
Edward Chang. Yeah, good.
Congratulations.
So come and see Liza afterwards. And then, as James said last week, I would at least talk about what's going to be coming next year for these lectures. So we're having another set in March, Wednesday evenings in March next year. The theme's going to be machine learning, statistical learning. I want to have people talking about both how it's done and the risks of doing it. We're still finalising who the speakers are. We're getting dates when people are actually available, but we'll be able to announce the lineup fairly soon, we hope. So thank you for attending the Ihaka lectures this year. Thank you people around the world and people in the future on the internet. And with any luck, the rain's calmed down enough so that it's safe to go out. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.